Hey guys, welcome back. Eric Smith here, contributor on 5 Reasons Sports, also co host of Scouting the Fins. You can find that on the 5 Reasons YouTube channel, and you can also find the audio for that on the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast feed. I also post these offensive line review videos along with defensive breakdowns every week on my personal YouTube page. You can find that under at OL Coach Smith 63. And that's also my Twitter handle if you want to talk more offensive line play over there. Um, as you guys know, these videos are focused on the offensive line, going through my grading of them. I'm glad that's all I'm talking about on these videos because the overall state of the franchise is the worst that I can remember it being. I'm going to continue to do these. I think there is still value in it, even if we do have a change in coach or GM or everything. It still holds value for me to be able to look at these guys week to week and see what kind of either progress or regression they are making throughout the season. So with that in mind, just a couple reminders here is that what we're looking at here is my grades. These aren't taken from anybody else. The average grade for an offensive lineman would be a 5.00. And the numbers that you are seeing here in parentheses are their grades so far this season. All right, as usual, we are going to go through each of these grades. We are going to start with the overall grade, which was a 3.77. This is definitely a step back. I believe this is the either fourth or fifth week in a row that we've had the same 5 stars on the offensive line. And prior to this week, that grade kept climbing up a little bit. We didn't see that same um, progression in the an upwards trend this week. It went down. Hopefully, they can bounce back next week and have a decent performance again. Next, we're going to go through each individual player working from lowest to highest. Before we get into the film review after that, I am going to share a graph that I've been keeping or a chart showing kind of the progression over the season of how these individual grades have gone and talk about some of the trends there. But we're going to start, like I said, with the individual grades like we always do. So Jonas Avainaya came in at a 1.41. He's been up and down week to week, but and we're going to talk about Patrick Paul kind of similar later. But for Jonah, the highs are not nearly as high, and the lows are about as low as you can go sometimes. So this is obviously not even close to a average grade, but in some ways it is still an improvement over what he's had in the past. He's had more issues in the pass game than the run game, but he needs to be better in both. And I think that when you look at how this game played out and how much they had to pass, it doesn't come as a huge surprise that he did not grade out very well. If you need a small consolation with Jonah, after grading at a 0 in weeks 2 and 3, he's been above that every week since then. Moving along, Cole Strange also below his season average, coming in at a 1.56. Out of the 11 negative marks that he had, only 2 of them were complete zeros. So he's not just getting, destroyed on every play. He doesn't have as many of the, just eye-popping negatives that we see with Jonah. So he's been more consistent. He just has not been consistently good. Our next one is going to be Patrick Paul coming in at a 4.16. That was also impacted by the false start penalty that he had. Out of the 6 plays for Paul that I had marked at least partially negative, only 2 of them were pass plays, and only one of those were in play action. So when we look at what we were hoping to get out of this game, Patrick Paul being able to show that he can handle Myles Garrett, not necessarily on his own. He got help certainly, but he held up very well for a second year player facing one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Continuing along, next up is Aaron Brewer. So he was the first one that was above the average of the 5.00, fairly close to his season average of 6.36. He had a total of 4 plays that were marked at least partially negative, and 3 of those were in the pass game. Aaron Brewer is always going to be one of those players that is going to shine more when the team has the opportunity to run the ball more often and more effectively. When you're putting to, put behind the chains, put behind the scoreboard, and put into passing scenarios, Aaron Brewer is a player that's going to trend a lot more back towards an average player versus, the high level player that we get in the run game. And then if you haven't figured it out, coming in with the highest grade again is Larry Borum, coming in with a 6.49. He also had 4 negative grades in the game. All 4 of those were in the run game. But I want to continue to caution you against that. The 40 plays that I have graded as pass blocking for the team, less than a quarter of those were when the protections were slid away from Larry Borum. So I think the team has really taken a stance of using the play calls to protect him, and maybe that has, come at the cost of guys like Jonah and also Cole Strange. But Larry Borum is kind of rounding into what I expected out of him, and that is that he is you know, a okay option as your swing tackle, the guy that you can cover up and still get by with, if everything else is starting caliber. Unfortunately, that's just not where the team is overall right now. All right, so like I said, I wanted to share this chart that I've been keeping. It does have all the offensive linemen, only have Patrick Paul up right now, but just kind of wanted to show that roller coaster of grades that I've been talking about with him. We did see him uh, before this week, the previous 2 weeks, have some nice, high values of 8.98, and then I had a 10.0 last week, and then dropping down again. Really hope that when he had those 2 high grades, that we were going to see that line stay up here more towards the top. But I think that if you came into this year and you told me that I could get this kind of performance, right, where we are getting, multiple of these above 8.0 performances, I think we'd be pretty pleased with that for Patrick Paul as a second year offensive tackle taking over for Teron Armstead. And then as I add Jonas Avayanaya to the graph, you can see that he has a very similar roller coaster type performance. Not the roller coaster is not nearly as high as Patrick Paul, and it doesn't dip nearly, or it dips much further than what Patrick Paul does. But one thing that I do kind of observe for this is that it is kind of trending upwards, right? If we look at where the peaks of these roller coasters are, it's slowly on an upwards trajectory. And same idea with the valleys of it, right? We started down here in weeks 2 and 3 with zero point 0.0 performances, and now the lows are slowly creeping up. So that would be something that I would hope to be able to see continue as the season moves on. That we're not going to get consistently 8.0s from Jonah throughout this season, but if we can continue to see that upward trajectory of both the peaks and the valleys of his grades, I think that can still, be a small win that you can get out of this season, despite the record of the team overall. And then adding in Aaron Brewer, and you can see that he is the most consistent player up here so far, and he's going to be the most consistent, even when we get to the end. That he hasn't graded quite as high as he did in previous years in my grading system here, but he's still, grading above average almost every week. And you can see that, there's not the up and down spikes the same way as the other players. So even though Patrick Paul, maybe the best player if we're talking about, Pro Bowl worthy players, Patrick Paul would still be on my list ahead of Aaron Brewer just because of the upside there. But Aaron Brewer has been the most consistent performer up front so far. And moving along the offensive line, we're going to add in Cole Strange here, and you can see that he just hasn't been that good. We don't have a single grade here where he has been above average. Even his highest grade, Jonah, still has 2 grades higher than what he is. I think that for Cole Strange, um, you don't have as many awful plays as you did with Keon Smith. I think that you kind of know what you're getting with Cole Strange a little more than Keon Smith or maybe some of the other options that there are. And I think that's kind of what the team is looking for right now is just, some kind of stability. But I haven't seen the growth in the grades from Cole Strange to make me think that he is anything more than a stopgap and, maybe a future reserve given his three position versatility. But he just has not been good this season for the Dolphins. And the last one we're going to look at here is Larry Borom. And you can see him in this green line that's kind of all over the place. But I think that what you can see in the performance here is that he was not good to start out. Really, really dipped down about as far as you can go in week 4 with a zero point 0 grade. I think they kind of overcorrected in terms of protecting him the following week. And now it feels like we're kind of getting into the place where they know how much help they can give him to not have him be a complete disaster. I think that Larry Borom has kind of been what I expected him to be in the sense that he's never going to be a high level starter. At best he's going to be a stopgap, a swing tackle. Still somebody that I feel fits better at guard than he does tackle, but that's not really an option given where the state of the offensive line is today. So not going to go too far into that, but I do think that this is a player that the Dolphins have realized they need to protect, and that they've kind of found a way you know, to protect him, kind of maybe at the cost of the guards. But if we can get James Daniels back in the lineup to replace Cole Strange and continue to get that upward trend from Jonas Avainaya, right, then maybe you can cover up for Larry Borom and find a competent mix of players until Austin Jackson's ready to return to the lineup as well. All right, we're going to go through some plays here on the film review. First one here, so this is a big play. This is a outside zone to the left early in the game. Might have even been the first drive. I don't remember. A lot of talk about Jonah being a key block on here. He was kind of him climbing to the second level here and getting attached to this linebacker is part of the reason that it was able to spring. Possibly could have been called for a hold there. But what I really wanted to highlight here was, first off, the combo block between Brewer and Jonah here. Would like to see a little more vertical movement from Jonah on the way there. Brewer, for as good as he is in the pass game, still struggles with this in the run game sometimes, that he is giving up a little bit of penetration and, being able to, that defender's basically surfing down the line of scrimmage. But the counter to that, the balance of it, is that you have Patrick Paul on the left side here, that in my opinion was the key to this run. And if you watch the way that as he gets off of the ball here, um, watching Aaron Brewer get pushed towards the play side, but we see Patrick Paul creating movement, and that's what really opened up that lane for Achane to get out there and go for a big gain on this play. Next one here is going to be a pin and pull concept to the right. So pin and pull is something they ran a few times last week, and we talked about it. It shows up again here pretty well. So we're going to get Darren Waller getting vertical here and essentially being, the edge of the pin. Borum is blocking down. We're getting a cut off from Jonah on the backside. Pat Paul is just sealing the backside of the play. And then we're going to get Cole Strange pulling around to kick out and Brewer leading up through. And unfortunately, Achane trips over his own feet a little bit there. But this was a play that could have sprung for a touchdown. But, like to see them going back to this concept that, they had pretty good success with it last week in the running game. So, we talked before about this being something that should remain in the playbook. So was glad to see them, run it a few times. Later on, we'll probably look at one later that wasn't as good, but still a very simple concept that's good to have in the playbook for the Dolphins. This one here I'm including in here just because I want to make sure that we still continue to cover the bases when we talk about box score watching versus offensive line performance. So there were obviously some sacks in this game, but they don't always fall on the offensive line. And this is going to be a good example of it. So they're running some play action. They're running outside zone to the right in terms of the play action. So we already know that they're they're not going to account for Myles Garrett on the backside of this. The idea of running something like this is that we want him to crash down, chasing that run play from the backside. But what we get, and we get that, right? We get Myles Garrett crashing down, pursuing, looking for that cutback if it's handed off. But what we don't recognize from an offensive perspective is that when this motion comes over, we get the safety walking up, and now we have two defenders coming off the edge, and both very much understand their responsibilities here. Garrett knows that he's not trying to get upfield for Tua. The safety knows that he has the contain. So in this one, for me, not an offensive line sack in any way. This is, mainly on the quarterback of not being able to recognize this safety walking up, coming hot. We know he's not accounted for. So, basically, I don't know. I guess what I would suggest here, or what I would have liked to see, is that once Tua sees this safety walking up, that you basically abandon that short run fake. You don't drift out this way, that you create some space, maybe drifting backwards here, and just hit the fullback in the flat, or, throw it in the ground. Just, can't take a sack here because we didn't recognize a free rusher. Here is a new concept the Dolphins put in for this week. Something, again, that I hope it sticks around. Uh, so what we're going to have here on the front side of it is that Larry Borum is going to block out on the defensive end. Cole Strange is going to basically pin, and then we're going to get Brewer coming around to this linebacker, and Patrick Paul coming around to that linebacker. Uh, sorry, it was Brewer coming around to this linebacker with the motion, and Patrick Paul coming around to that linebacker. But same idea here, right? Just real simple. We're facing a four-man front. We're pinning the defensive tackle, sealing the defensive end, and then getting downhill here. So as you can see, looping through the A gap, looping through the B gap, getting up to the next level, and getting another big play out of this. So, I don't know whether we classify this somewhere in the outside zone family. Kind of reminds me of like a center power, but you also got the tackle folding around the backside of it as well, so it's not quite center power. So I'd be interested to hear what you would call this concept if it's something you're familiar with. But definitely like it from the Dolphins. They went back to it later in the game, not as successful, but it wasn't a scheme issue. We'll cover that when we get to it. All right, so we don't have to go too far to find the next one that is that same concept. I think that first one was the end of the first half. This was pretty early in the second half. Clearly, they liked the way that it worked. Getting another favorable look for it here. We should have Larry Borum out there. Cole Strange. We're looping around. We are folding on the backside here, looping Patrick Paul around. But if we watch Cole Strange here, you're going to see why this one fails. Um, so as he steps down, that defender's able to, almost Euro step. We see Myles Garrett doing that quite a bit, and, doing it very well. This guy obviously not as agile, not covering the space that Garrett does, but does a good job getting that left hook on Cole Strange and toss him to the side. The result is that you not only have that defender running free, but now Patrick Paul can't get to number 49, and the play is dead in the water. But still a play that, as we move forward into future weeks of the season, I hope this is one that sticks around when we get these even fronts. Um, it can be used in almost any scenario, whether you spread the defense out on early downs and can check to it for an easy run, right? Or I think when it was running the first half, I think it was a, kind of behind the stick situation, and, just another run that gives you good angles that could pop for a long one occasionally. So worked well once, did not work well the other time, but like the X's and O's of this one, and hope it stays in the playbook. And there are still some miscommunications on this offensive line. We're going to see it on this play. Watching this defensive tackle be able to basically run through and make the play. You see Patrick Paul at the end of the play kind of looking over towards Jonas Avayanaya. And I don't know where the blame falls here, but something's not right. So this is going to be duo to the left, right? So the entire line's going to be moving to your right side. And what we get here is Larry Borum and Cole Strange are basically working a combo out here to number 17. We're going to get Aaron Brewer here one-on-one on this backside 1 or 2I, however you want to classify that as. And seems to me that it should be Jonah working through the defensive tackle in a combo block with Patrick Paul up to there. And then we're just looking for either a cutoff or washing the defensive end down from the backside from Julian Hill. And that is Myles Garrett. So, I could see why Patrick Paul would want to give some more help there, but somewhere the communication is breaking down here because if you watch the way that Jonah comes off the ball, oops, let's get to the snap. Right, you can see that he is stepping left and he's getting that inside shoulder. The way that he is fitted into that, to me, feels 100% like he is expecting Patrick Paul to be fit in there as well, right? You can see his eyes are up at the linebacker. He does not feel like he is supposed to be solo blocking that defensive tackle. And then we see both Paul and Jonah climb into that linebacker. So again, I don't know where the fault is between these two on this play, but either way, we can't have a three technique defensive tackle running straight into our running back on a short yardage play. All right, we talked earlier about pin and pull. So I'm going to get another one of those here. This is going to be to the left. And this time we are going to get, it's going to be Patrick Paul pinning here. Jonah is out. Aaron Brewer is out. And then we're just getting the cutoff on the backside from Strange and the seal backside there. Supposed to get in through here. But watching Patrick Paul on this one should be down block and trying to wash him as far that way as you can with that pin block. But you can see that his defender gets too much penetration, is able to affect Brewer, and eventually get into the backfield to get a hand on Achane. Thought everything else on this play was pretty good. You can kind of see Patrick Paul leaning into it a little bit there, and then I don't want to say he was hesitant coming off the ball, right? But not really running through it. Ideally, right? If we're talking about coaching this at the high school level, I'd be telling him to get his head across that defender in front of it to prevent the penetration. And in the end, this is something the Dolphins really have not asked Patrick Paul to do a whole lot. So can certainly see a scenario where he would improve at this. But if we're looking at this play and how we want to be able to see this pin and pull concept continue to grow in the playbook, this is an improvement that we need to see from Patrick Paul, that he is able to get that down block to pin that defender and not give up this kind of penetration. All right, so this one here is they're backed up on their goal line. This is going to be a outside zone to the right, and I think ideally it would have been one that bends back. But we talked last week about the zone running game being about numbers. So you have your center, your guard, and your tackle are the three guys to the play side of this. Your fullback's going to motion away from it. But when you look at the number of defenders to the backs or to the front side of it, you have the linebacker, the defensive tackle, your edge, and this guy that's walked up here now becomes four. You are at a disadvantage here. And your only hope to be able to get this play off is that everything gets washed down and you're able to cut it back. And that's what, I think they're trying to do is that, we get Borum blocking out. Strange is blocking out. Brewer is blocking out through here, trying to get into some sort of combo to wash all of that out. And then you're going to get Jonah trying to cut off here, which means that you're asking Patrick Paul to get all the way across to that linebacker. I think Julian Hill is going to be there. I think we're going to get Ingold in motion up to the linebacker. But in order for this to work, right, you need Jonah to be able to completely wash down that defensive tackle. You need Patrick Paul to be able to get all the way over to that linebacker. And you're depending on Julian Hill to get a cutoff block on Myles Garrett. So, just the structure of this play overall just doesn't make a ton of sense here for me. And it looks like it. It looks like you are running a play that is outnumbered to the play side. Um, as the play starts, you can see, you know, in a perfect scenario, right? If we're talking more of neutral field position, maybe you like the idea of trying to hit this cut back lane here, but Jonah doesn't do a great job. Cole Strange doesn't get much movement. Julian Hill does not get the cutoff that you need to cut this back. So you get Achane trying to bounce this and get to the outside. And again, can't blame him for this. The biggest fault for me is that it feels like this is a great opportunity to run, some sort of A gap power here, right? You could easily go, here, here, block backside and either bring Jonah around or bring the fullback on an ISO. Like there are so many options that you could run here that would have been better than running outside zone to your weak side where you are severely outnumbered. So I just felt like this one, and I don't know what the play clock was here and whether Tua had a chance to check out of it or not, but this is just one that, felt like it was very much a outcoached scenario. And then this one here is going to end up being interception, and another one that is not a offensive line issue. I think that when people see that free rusher in the face of Tua that results in an interception, a lot of times it goes to the offensive line. But when we watch what happens on the play, focus here on Brewer first, and you can see that he is setting to the left. So to me, this is a half slide to the left protection where everybody here has their gap to the left. And then over here, it's essentially big on big, right? You have guard on the defensive tackle and end on or tackle on the defensive end. But then we get this free rusher. And the eyes are kind of over there. Like it feels like that should at least be in his peripheral vision. But then he's peeking to the left. This ball has to be out now. Like you have to know this guy is coming in hot, and if not, then you need to be able to get to the backside here. I have no idea what he thought he was throwing at. Part of me feels like, when you have somebody blitzing, you typically want to throw into the space that they're vacating. So as Achane's chipping there, I would almost just like to see him become an outlet and sit down right there instead of running into the middle linebacker. Uh, some people say that he had the opportunity to throw it out to Waddle out there, or Washington, I guess that is out there. And while that's true, you're not coming all the way back across that, but it comes way before that, right? Like I said, you've got to know that you're sliding protection to the left side here, and that when this safety is coming, that ball's got to get out of there because he's not getting blocked. You're in the end zone, so you definitely can't take a sack and take the safety. But this, to me, falls on the quarterback of head going back and forth, not seeing this blitzing safety, or at least not taking care of the ball when you see the blitzing safety and knowing it's got to get out of there in a much safer manner than what this was. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for this week's review. As you can see, there's good stuff, there's bad stuff. Even in this, dreadful season, there is still things that we can look for the future of the Dolphins on their offensive line. I think that at this point in the season, you're trying to pick out the small wins, right? Is that Patrick Paul's continued ascension into hopefully a Pro Bowl level tackle? Is it Jonah's continued growth into just being a competent guard here in the NFL, right? Or, are we looking forward to the return of James Daniels, Austin Jackson, and seeing what the line looks like? Hopefully somewhere at the second half of the season, we can see what this line looks like fully healthy and see how much change for that is needed for next year, whether it's the same staff or somebody completely different. As always, appreciate you guys watching. Feel free to leave some comments below. If you have any ideas on how I can do, different with this as we progress through the season, let me know.